Welcome to the Aardvark Guide to 7% More Profit. I'm going to talk about the structure of this, of our next sort of like 35 minutes together in a second, but I just want to lead off by talking about the example that really like brought this work into focus, brought the value of this work that we're about to do together into focus. So we started Aardvark by just sort of like having conversations casually with friends that own businesses. And then once we had a sense that there was some real value being transacted, we launched as a real business. And the first client that we had, our very first client, came to us, had lost $750,000 the year before. He was actually kind of still in the midst of losing the money. I think he had just sort of stopped paying attention to how bad the situation had become, because I think we can probably all relate to this as small business owners, but sometimes you'd almost like rather not look at the mess like as you're figuring it out for a period of time, just because it's so ugly. And so we engaged in a process that reflects a lot of what we're about to spend our time doing. And I'm gonna take you through that. That's in a step-by-step way. But I think the thing that we took away from it was a situation where the guy had lost $750,000, and through this exact work, we were able to sort of improve his experience, and that was meaningful. That was impactful. That showed how sort of like how tactical we could be with this kind of exercise. And so we wanted to memorialize the work in this workshop and in our time together here over the next sort of 30 minutes or so. So, welcome. We've broken this into 3 parts. So this is the first part. This is where we're going to be converting operating expense into profit. So we're shooting for like 2% minimums here, with each of these exercises. So we'll show you how to convert 2% of operating expense into profit. The next phase will be gross margin. We'll talk about what that means and what that is, and how we can extract 2% from your costs and convert those into profit. And we measure that by gross margin. And then we're going to be talking about pricing and how to sort of use the lever of pricing to add at least 3 percentage points to your business from the pricing exercise. So I've spent about 20 years with small businesses, and I've really had the privilege of working. I think that the fun thing about small business is that you get a lot of access at an early level. And I started as a carpenter. The business was 3 people. That business was 3 people, and I was working for the owner, and he was like teaching me how to do the carpentry, and he was the owner cutting the checks, right? And in every phase, as I worked up through larger small businesses, like eventually getting to a place where the businesses were like $10 and $20 million, you still had that access. You still had that proximity to ownership and getting a sense for how they thought, and how they made decisions, and what challenges they were facing. And there's something special about that in small business, where it's like no matter how big the small business, as long as it stays a small business, you can walk down the hall and talk to the owner. And so that privileged access just gave me a lot of insight into what the experience was, and as I started running businesses myself. But also, it wasn't until sort of late in the game that I realized the power of leading with a financial point of view. For a long time, I just thought it was actually good decision making, that was the distinguishing factor between like a average business and a good business. It wasn't until like a more recent chapter with a group that was like really financially focused that I came to adopt their perspective in how important it is to lead a business with this financial sort of like mechanism running in the background. Even if it's not your thing, it has to have a presence in the business in some form for it to make an impact, and also for your business to really like separate from the pack. Because in small businesses, so many of them share the same characteristics, and so many of them are grinding through the same stuff. And the ones that can separate from that, have a different experience. And in my opinion, the reason they have a different experience is by applying some of this thinking and some of these teachings to their business directly. So let's get into it. So first, there's a reason that businesses don't make progress on this on a regular basis. It's hard. And I can tell you one thing with a certainty, that you're going to encounter roadblocks on the way down this path that you might have encountered before and that you've deemed impossible or, felt like they were immovable, probably come to you in the form of ideas that you've had in your thinking and you've thought, yeah, maybe I should do that, but I can't because of XYZ reason, or yeah, if that happens, this happens, or, so you start to form these perspectives in your mind about why things can't happen. The thing is, though, that working through that is the exact territory that you need to confront. And in small business, like, the landscape changes so quickly, for better and worse, but you have to make decisions like quickly on the fly, and decisions that you've made like 6 months ago, probably don't apply to the business right now because of that sort of feature. And that gives you an opportunity, and it gives you an opportunity to sort of like question the decisions you've made. But a lot of us don't take that opportunity, and a lot of us like sit with those residual decisions in the form of residual costs, and they just kind of become like a long-standing feature of the business. And so part of our goal is to challenge those assumptions. So you have an important decision to make. Would I rather validate my own thinking, like my previous thinking, or would I rather have a more profitable business? Like, at the end of the day, that's the question that you need to confront. My job is to sort of like guide you through that so that you end up making the decision to have a more profitable business. So think about this. Go back to the first day you started your business. You're doing the thing that you love doing. Somebody comes out of the nowhere, possibly with wings, and says, I'll make you a deal. From here on out, you can do the thing that you love. And if you sell $10 of that thing, you get to keep $1 of it, and sometimes 50 cents. You would never make that deal. But so many small businesses owners find themselves like in that situation in a daily basis. And it's not because they're flawed. It's not because they're making mistakes. It's just that they've come to sort of incorporate what they deem as the realities of their situation as immovable objects. And we're here to sort of like disprove that theory. So often profit is all you hear about in business. And the reason is because it's essential to your company. So, when we were titling this workshop, part of me resisted like using the term profit because, it's in the category of sort of catchphrasey, like gimmicky works. I'm just like picturing YouTube thumbnails with like Lamborghinis and words like scale and 10x and, all that garbage. And I just like, I hate to sort of even touch that realm. And, but the reality is like profit like has its place in the descriptor of the financial operation of the business. And it's because it's essential. And so if you've struggled in business, like paying your employees on time or paying them enough or, dealing with cash issues, you probably have a profit problem. And for small business, there's a hazard. There's a hazard that's like particular to small business in this realm. And it's that business owners feel guilty about having too much profit in their business. And I want to talk about why that's problematic. That is a fatal flaw. Business owners that I work with who feel this way typically generate like net profit numbers for their business between 5 and 10%. And like that characteristic by itself is not a problem. It's just that for most of the businesses that you guys own, like that feature, that framework doesn't apply. So I'll give you an example. So if you have like a manufacturing company where you have like orders coming for days and you have like a really repeatable process for like, stamping out the thing, you can get away with having like a net profit number of 5 or 10% because your play in that scenario is volume. But for a lot of clients we work with, the revenue is project based. Like there isn't any certainty around like when the next project's going to land, or like when the next RFP is coming to pass, or like when you'll get awarded, or even if you'll get a chance to bid on it. So looking out further than like 3 months is really challenging. And the expense side of your business like fluctuates just as much. As you know, like subcontractors come in and out of the of the work, and sometimes they need to be like floated between project to project, and a lot of times like you as the business owner, you're on the hook for like expenses in an even way, even when like revenue is lumpy. And for that kind of business, like you need a lot of profit in order to operate with any sense of comfort, to sort of like navigate those peaks and valleys. So the way I like to sort of reframe this is that profit is not excess, it's oxygen. Like you have to have it, because like if you're in single digit profit numbers for a business that's like, even smaller than $5 million, like that's a survival situation. We want to get you out of that. And by the way, the market's going to tell you if you're being too greedy. Like you don't need to self-regulate that. So as I mentioned, 3 structures to this. Today we're talking about 2% profit from operating expense. That's all we're talking about today. Gross margin is going to be going to follow this, and then pricing and profit is going to be the last segment. So let's take a breath and fix this thing. This is the conceptual framework that I like the best for thinking about the operation of your business and how to translate that into sort of like a financial framework or financial concept that might be useful to you. So I think about a sieve that has 2 layers. I think of them as like filters. So your job as the operator is to be a steward of the revenue. So if you look under revenue, there are 10 squares there. I'm just treating those as like units. Eventually we'll translate those units to dollars for the sake of this exercise, but at first I like to keep it as conceptual as possible, not even use dollars. So just think of those units, and your role as the operator is to get those units intact, as many as possible, to profit at the bottom of that arrow, and not lose any casualties, or as few as possible. So in the first filter is called cost of goods sold. So in this example, we've lost 6 units to cost of goods sold. And this is not like an arbitrary example. This is pretty consistent with a lot of the businesses that we see. And we'll drill down on why that is specifically more in part 2. But at this early stage, all you need to get is the concept. So the first filter, you lose 6 units in this scenario. 4 make it through. Those 4 are called gross profit. So the next filter to navigate is called operating expense. So 2 filters, 2 measures of expense, and 2 measures of profit. So right now we've got 2 measures of expense, cost of goods, and operating expense, both abbreviated to COGS and OPEX. And then gross profit, and the next one coming is called NOI, stands for net operating income. So in a casual way here, we've lost 9 units to the 2 filters. And even though this is abstract right now, you'll see how that can sort of easily happen in a business. So we lost 9 units to the 2 filters. We've got 1 that makes it through. So this sort of tracks back to our like fairy tale scenario where, somebody comes up and makes like, the Faustian agreement with you, right? And says like, you can do this thing that you love to do, but you're exchanging 10 for 1. Like this is how it happens. So we've started with revenue of $10, just like pivoting to the table on the right. That's the financial expression of this concept. So on the left, we've got just like the visual conceptual form. On the right, we're starting to morph into a financial statement, just like in its earliest forms. So $10 of revenue, we lost $6 to cost of goods sold. We've got $4 of gross profit left over. You need those $4 to pay for the rest of the business and to take some profit home. So operating expense of $3. Net operating income, which is like a proxy for profit in this exercise, of $1. So if you understand the concept on the left and the table on the right, then you understand this. So this image looks probably maybe like a little bit more intimidating, looks dense, not fun. but you understand it based on like the conceptual journey that we've taken. So at the top line here, $21,955, that's the first filter going back to this scenario. That's cost of goods sold here. The second line is gross profit. That's our first measure of profit. And then everything else expressed here is operating expense. It's just called expenses in this scenario. In finance, there's like duplication of phrases and vocabulary all over the place. It's just a feature of the landscape. It's tricky. Fouled me up for a long time. But operating expenses and expenses are the same thing. So what is expressed here in this image is the second filter in a lot more detail and sort of like in a real world scenario. So it's important to understand that there are two tools here available to you to influence the profit in your business. You can find different areas to deploy them, but effectively it's the price cost relationship and volume. So what we've got here is the thing that you do. You can make it more expensive or you can do more of it. Now, on the other side of making it more expensive, that's why I've got like the price cost sort of like, example, like sort of doubled up example is because take an example of like you charge $150 an hour for something. You can add more profit on an hourly basis by charging $200 an hour to that. Or let's say you have a subcontractor that bills you $100 for that thing. In order to add $50 of profit additionally to what you already bill, you could go to your subcontractor and you could say, hey, actually, like I need you to bill me $50 an hour instead of $100. So that's how you would add $50 of profit, like by subtraction, by influencing the cost side. A lot of times, like the businesses that we work with, the owners feel like there isn't a lot of room on the cost side, so they'd prefer to raise prices. And actually, like that's a bigger ceiling. We'll talk more about that in part 3. But just like as a framework, understanding that those are the only things, like the cost of the thing and the price of the thing are the only things you can influence, or the volume. You can just do more of it. And that's taxing to the business in a different way. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. So we're focusing on cost in part 1 and part 2, and then price in part 3. So here's how to visualize the cost side of the equation, just like mapping back to our conceptual expression here. Under revenue, we started with losing $6 in that first filter, if you remember our original concept. In this example, we're losing $5. So we've got, as a result of that, there are $5 left in gross profit to pay for the rest of the business. So you can see as like we morph over from the conceptual to the mathematical. We had $10. We started with $10. We only lost $5 to cost of goods instead of $6. That leaves us with $5 of gross profit. We've got operating expense left of $3. That stayed the same as our original example. But even though operating expenses stayed the same, our profit has doubled because of how we influenced cost of goods sold and reduced that by 10%. So that's powerful. Anytime you can double profit in your business, like you got to pay attention to the thing that's causing that. In this scenario, I don't want to be cavalier about the fact that you've reduced cost of goods sold by 10%. That's a big deal. It's hard to do. It's almost impossible to do it in one whack. But the result is astounding. I mean, you can double profit by doing this. So you really want to pay attention to like what's going on in each of these filters, especially in this scenario, the cost of goods sold filter. But we're going to talk about the next filter too. So in this scenario, we've added to that, instead of the filter of operating expense being responsible for 3 units, we're now saying it only grabs 2 units. So 3 units make it through in this scenario. So you can see like profit is like stacking on itself because of the changes we're making to the expense structure. So started with $10 of revenue. We're going down to $5 of cost of goods sold, $5 of gross profit left over, and operating expense now reduced to 2. So we've influenced both filters in this scenario cost of goods, and operating expense. As a result of it, we've tripled profit, which is like astounding, obviously. So this is a macro view of the two changes we just made, influencing the cost of goods filter and then influencing the operating expense filter. Doubled profit, tripled profit by making those two moves. So we turned what was $1 in profit into $3. And just think about this as it relates to your business. Like, think about your P&L. Think about like the results of the business of all the work you did last year. You know, doubling or tripling profit. There's no question, unequivocally, like it would have had a massive impact on your business. So we're going to talk about sort of how to make that transfer or translate into to your business specifically, like in this next little segment. Okay. So you should be able to look at your P&L now and visualize the ballet of your business. Maybe not just because of the 20 minutes we've spent, but hopefully, if not in this first segment, certainly by the second segment and by the third at a minimum, it should start to feel intuitive to you conceptually what's going on. And hopefully it looks like a ballet, although I understand it doesn't feel like that on a daily basis. So if you have a 10% profit margin in your business, this framework's powerful. I mean, this framework relates to different math profiles, but I like this one because it's simple and it relates to our first example. So the first example where you exchange $10 for $1, this is the sort of like verbal expression of that exchange. If you have a 10% margin in your business, for every $1 of expenses, you need to sell $10 to pay for that. So think about, we went from $10, we retained $1 of profit in our first conceptual expression of a business. It's very common for a lot of businesses to have that profile. But in that example, every time you spend $1, you need to sell $10 more to make its way through those filters so that you end up with $1 in profit. And the reason I think this is powerful for small businesses is like a lot of the businesses that we work with, they don't love selling. They just sell because they have to in order to do more of the thing that they love. And so if that describes you, then this framework makes you think about every dollar that you spend. You know, if you have to turn around and sell more to do that, you got to be precious with those dollars that you're spending. So we're focusing on the second filter for this example, this like technical example that we're moving into, and that's operating expense. So think of expenses as investments, as in the business is investing in like a $750 truck payment each month. It applies new context to that line item from my point of view. So, you know, when you're going down the expense structure of your business and you're thinking through or you're looking at the P&L and it says like, okay, $750 truck payment, like, you know, $300 like software item, like, you know, just like there's benign like mundane stuff, and then you see like $400 hotel payment or hotel expense. So like if you might be sort of inclined to sort of glide past that, but if you make yourself say the business is investing in a $400 hotel expense, it might cause you to think through that application a little bit differently, which is like the appropriate level of scrutiny, particularly for a small business. Like that might not be the right investment for that amount of money. And we're going to refer back to that sort of like for every dollar you spend, you need $10 to pay for that. We're going to refer to that in a second here. But expenses in general, they should be in support of your business, not a drag on the business. So look at this P&L. And the purpose of doing this is because it probably looks like yours. This is an example that I've just like anonymized of a client of ours. This business does between like $400,000 to $500,000 worth of revenue, and so like it's a very representative like example of the expense structure of a business on the operating expense side. So I've taken some liberties to express this in a little bit more dynamic way. But effectively what we've done here is removed 4 lines from the 4 individual lines, and you can jump back to in between these 2 slides to see which ones I did, but effectively it's insurance, software, travel, meals, and entertainment, operating expense. You can see those all represented here with the exact values that I've sort of sketched out here. We took each of those 4 and reduced them by 10%, and the sort of like the sum total of those reductions is $1,000. Now, a couple things to note here. I don't want to make it seem like it's easy to do this, or that it doesn't take time, or that this is just like a math exercise. It is a math exercise, but it's also an operational exercise, because it's going to take you, the owner, likely time to sit down and call your insurance company and ask them if they have like a more aggressive policy with the same coverage, effectively asking them if they can do better with their price. And if they say no, then you're going to have to call like a couple of other competitors, and you're going to probably be wondering, like, this doesn't seem like it's worth my time. And I'm working on making the case that it is worth your time. But like, these are the mindsets that we find ourselves like trapped in, where it's just like, this isn't a good use of my time. You're worrying about like delivering the service, delivering the project, selling the product, making sure that it comes out right, making sure that everybody's paid, like all of these like intense dynamics that we're dealing with as small business owners, like on a daily basis. The last thing you're thinking about is like, do I call my insurance company to get a better rate? Now, big companies are super good at this. And the reason they're good at it is because like the dollars matter a ton. So they don't even have a hope of reducing like a $200 million revenue business has no hope of reducing their insurance line by 10%. Like it's just not going to happen because the numbers are so big. But like if they can get a 0.5 percentage point, they will, and they'll fight for that. So it's important to sort of like establish these behaviors at the early side. Software, same thing. Like I can tell you sitting here, I've probably got like, I don't know, 4 like zombie software applications that I paid for, seemed like a good idea, thought I was going to get a lot of value out of it, used it for a week or 2, stopped using it, forgot to cancel, something like that, right? So getting 10% out of software doesn't seem like a huge ask. Same thing, travel, meals, and entertainment. This is like a discretionary line. This isn't something that like the business isn't going to run if you don't spend that money. So look at that line. Like, look at the savings here of this $271. That's what we've just sort of like fought to save by applying more like discretion and scrutiny to our thinking. But what we're seeing play out here mathematically is like exactly that example that I talked about. You would have to sell, if this was a 10% net profit business, you would have to sell $2,710 worth of stuff to pay for that $271 spend, if that was the amount of your spend. Like, that's a lot of money. So next line, operating expenses. Like, this is, these are Apple AirPods, these are, USB cables, these are reams of paper, whatever it is. But like, they're not all in that category. Like that, I just know from experience, like that's a line where you can find 10%. So the purpose of this exercise is like finding only 4 lines. So we're only talking about 4. Finding 4 lines and reducing them by 10% in categories where that's actually like achievable. It can make a big difference. So the total expenses of this month for this business were $24,716. We've reduced 4 lines by 10%. That's $1,000. Total expenses now, $1,000 less, $23,687. Total expenses were 45% of revenue for the month. Now the total expenses are 43% of revenue. And guess where that 2% savings goes? It goes through that second filter and becomes more profit. Shows up in the form of more profit. So this is the concept. And this is like why it's powerful and how it's attainable. So when you when you're evaluating expenses, the temptation is to think in terms of big swings. Like you're not going to reevaluate that insurance policy unless you get like, a 10 or 20% reduction, like probably closer to 20 before you were actually spurred to take action in the midst of everything else that you're doing. But being incremental is far more effective. 4 expense categories reduced by 10%, that added 2% of profit. And like, there's no magic here. There's no like, but you also need to do this. I mean, these are the tactics. These are the steps to add profit to your business right now. So this like ushers in my little rocket science equation. And this is where I go on a rant about this phrase that I hate, which you hear in small business all the time, like it's not rocket science. And it's not, but it's hard, and it's hard to be consistent, which is why there are so many marginal small businesses out there, people that aren't taking the time to apply this extra level of scrutiny. And that's only 2% we found, but we're building discipline. And if you groove this in now, it makes you a better operator for life. And what I mean by that is like the business will evolve around this discipline. So if you apply this thinking and do this like on a consistent basis, like when the business doubles, you're going to have the same habits. And so the benefits are going to double as well. Like if you preserve like the rigorous discipline around, doing these behaviors. So early on, the habit's more valuable than the result, but that'll change fast as the business grows. So now we touch on the example that I led with, where our first client came to us, lost $750,000. The part that I didn't mention in the first few seconds of this presentation was the first year that we worked with them, sales dropped 10%. So like they had lost $750,000, and then sales dropped 10%. Like while we were working together, sales were going downhill. So we turn things around anyway by doing everything that we just talked about, just like the exact exercise I just took you through. We went line by line, scrutinizing each cost. Was it essential to the business? If not, it was gone. And like this wasn't easy. This was an exercise where like I would go through the expense structure and I would say, what about this? Like, what about this? Seems like we could reduce this. And what would inevitably come back is the owner would say, we can't do that. Like if we do that, like this person will leave. Or if we do that, like we can't do this, service, or, we can't do this product. We can't sell this product, or, we're losing a bunch of revenue, like in a different portion of the business. And so it took like a bunch of back and forth to get him to sort of understand that we were truly talking about expenses that were essential to the business or not. So if it wasn't, it was gone. And it wasn't easy or fun. I mean, in business, like you probably know, like when things aren't going right, it touches everything like in your life. I mean, so we were having conversations where the guy was in tears. He, was putting strain on his marriage, and, he was like sort of second guessing his value as an owner, as an operator of the business. And so that's why I go back to my original line about just like, it's not hard. Like it's not rocket science. I mean, sorry, it's not easy. It's not rocket science, but it is hard. And this is like the territory that you have to navigate through. And, this is we spend a lot of time doing this with clients who work with us on an advisory basis. Like we're working through this territory, and often it is personal, or it touches personal. It touches beliefs about why things are or have to be a certain way. And we help people move through this stuff in addition to doing the math. So it's not easy or fun, but neither is running a business that's losing money. And a business doesn't have to be losing money to be painful to run. And marrying the correct expense structure to the business you have takes discipline. But 2% profit in your business, 2% more profit in your business is the first step to experiencing a real change. So that business ended up experiencing an $850,000 swing in 1 year to the next in net profit. And I mean, the thing that's important, like, he didn't sell more stuff, he sold less stuff, and we still had this huge impact in net profit. And it was successful because we followed the steps that we covered in, throughout this series. And at this point, hopefully you understand like which elements of the expense structure affect your business, what you can do to find 2% of profit in your own business, and that apart from the mathematical framework, the true results come from making hard choices. Like those are the steps. Those are the ingredients. I love this line. People who succeed at the highest level are not lucky. They're the ones doing something differently than everyone else. So we're talking about the small business landscape. Like, these are the steps to start to separate yourself, to put yourself in a different profit category by applying this level of discipline. It's also worth noting that, like, if you have a business that you're able to apply some of this thinking to, maybe you're doing $100,000 or $200,000 or $500,000, or maybe you're just about to sort of get over $1 million or heading towards $2 million. Like, those are all fantastic accomplishments, and there's nothing more engaging than having something to apply these concepts to. And if that's you, you've demonstrated like an enormous achievement, and it's something to be proud of. And I think if you apply a lot of this thinking, you're going to be more efficient in your next growth chapter than you have been in your previous chapter, because like we all have these periods when we're starting these businesses where it's just like a purely a function of determination and just like the will to make it succeed. But like as the business grows bigger, the more receptive to efficiency it's going to be, and the more effective as an owner you're going to be, and the more profitable you're going to be, which is the whole point. So thanks so much. See you in chapter 2.